This week's blog post is the first in my series on why did the Roman Empire fall. The traditional date for the end of the Roman Empire is 476 AD, when Odoacer invaded the city of Rome with a German army and deposed Emperor Romulus Augustulus. How did the once mighty Roman Empire sink so low that a barbarian horde could topple it? Scholars have offered a wide variety of reasons for the decline. The rise of Christianity, barbarian invasions, manpower shortage and population decline, proletarian revolution of the soldiers against the bourgeoisie, Roman blood being diluted with barbarian blood, upper classes suffering from lead poisoning, change in climate, or some combination of unfortunate events that just happen to occur together, which would make the fall of the empire an accident rather than inevitability. I prefer to rephrase the question from why did the empire fall to why did it stay together and what changed so that its citizens let it fall apart. So it's a sort of cost-benefit analysis, although the Romans would not have thought in those terms. I want to start by looking at Roman achievements during the empire. Before we consider why the empire fell apart, we're going to look at why the empire began and what level of civilization it reached. Beginning in 90 BC, civil wars tore the Roman Republic apart. Check out the biographies of Sulla, Pompey, Julius Caesar, and Crassus, for example. The wars were ended by Octavian, who in 31 BC defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. Under the title Augustus, he then became the first emperor of Rome. Augustus was a different type of ruler from any during the Republic. He had sweeping powers and he held them for 45 years. But he kept the outward trappings of the Republic's government, including senators, consuls, and tribunes. The 2 centuries that followed the Battle of Actium were the empire's high point culturally, economically, and politically. Let me give you some examples of that. First of all, law and citizenship. The Roman Republic was founded in 510 BC. Over the course of the next 1,000 years, the Romans created a rational, internally consistent law code that favored individuals and property rights. Roman law was so useful that it was revived to govern business relationships beginning around 1100 AD, when the economy of Europe began to revive from the Middle Ages. Rome's laws remain the basis for modern law codes in much of Europe, Japan, and parts of South America. Under Roman law, those with the status of citizen could vote, hold elective office, make contracts, own and inherit property, and marry, with their children automatically becoming citizens. Roman citizens were exempt from some local taxes and regulations. In the judicial system, they could sue and be sued, could have a legal trial, and could appeal the judge's decision. Unless found guilty of treason, no Roman citizen could be tortured, whipped, or sentenced to death. Women who were citizens had fewer rights than men, but they could own property, engage in business, and get divorced. All those rights made the status of Roman citizen one to aspire to. But Roman law also recognized that foreigners who lived within the empire or dealt with its citizens had rights. Under international law, the Jus Gentium, the law of nations, foreigners had the right to own property, make contracts, and conduct business. Hence, even for non-citizens, living in the empire was profoundly better than living beyond the empire's borders, where brute force and authoritarian rule prevailed. This is the Forum in Rome, which was the center of Rome's day-to-day life. It included courts for trials. It was where you would go to make a speech, political speech, to engage in trade, and the triumphal processions for victorious generals would run through the Forum as well. Okay, moving on to architecture and engineering. Think of a Greek temple. Now think of a Greek temple that looks different. Bet you can't. Greek temples were beautifully proportioned stone boxes on platforms built with post and lintel construction. Their proportions were so rigidly set that we can calculate the size of a whole temple if a single metope survives. And a metope is one of these little squares up here. The interior of such temples was never meant for public gatherings. It was secondary to the exterior. The Romans introduced and disseminated widely two major innovations in architecture: concrete and the arch. Combining these two allowed much greater variety in the size and shape of buildings, including huge soaring spaces. To make the exterior and interior more appealing, the concrete was faced with marble or with brick that was plastered and painted. And the Romans didn't just build magnificent buildings. Roman engineers constructed enormous aqueducts to provide fresh water to cities. They built public baths with elaborate heating systems. They devised sewage systems that were not surpassed until the 19th century. They constructed sturdy roads for trade and communication inside cities and between distant points of the empire. Many of these works were so well constructed that they continued in use long after the Roman Empire had fallen. Some are still in use today. For example, the Cloaca Maxima at Rome, the sewer, the aqueducts at Segovia and Nîmes, and the bridge at Alcantara. Members of a steadily increasing middle class in the empire were able to afford elegant, comfortable homes. Roman engineering and technology, including those aqueducts, sewers, and cast concrete, made their lives comfortable even in crowded cities. Moderate taxes paid for such infrastructure, as well as the legal system and defense of the borders. All right, we've talked about law and being a citizen. We've talked about Roman engineering and technology. Let's talk about the exchange of goods and ideas. The early Roman Empire, around 31 BC to 180 AD, was the era of the Pax Romana, a period of peace and prosperity. On the empire's borders, Roman soldiers kept out the looting barbarians. On the Mediterranean, the Roman navy kept pirates under control. On land, those well-built Roman roads allowed fast, safe travel. During this period, people, goods, and knowledge circulated widely. In the city of Rome, you could buy Greek olive oil, French wine, even Chinese silk. If you wanted the best physicians, you could travel to Pergamum, a famed medical center in modern Turkey. If you had a curious mind, you might visit one of Rome's dozen libraries. You might even sail to Alexandria, where the great library had been established in the 3rd century BC. Its founder's goal was for it to become a repository of all knowledge. The library at Alexandria held tens of thousands of papyrus scrolls, maybe even hundreds of thousands, that dealt with everything from mathematics, astronomy, and physics to poetry. If you couldn't travel to Alexandria to read a particular book, then the scholars there could copy it and send it to you. Let's move on to the art in the empire. I'm an art historian, so I can't ignore Roman art, but that said, the Romans showed no great creativity in that realm. They appreciated Greek sculpture enough to develop a way to make very accurate copies of it, but they didn't create such new original works. The same was true of painting. Most or all of the architectural views, still lifes, landscapes, and scenes of everyday life that decorated Roman homes were copies of Greek models. Roman portrait busts, which originated in wax death masks, were extremely realistic. They were created for religious rather than artistic purposes. The Romans' only contribution in sculpture was a type of narrative relief that represented the achievements of Roman emperors. Early examples, such as the Areopagus, shown here, were executed with a high level of technical skill. These are quite distinct people, in a variety of poses. In that one that we just looked at, the faces and the poses are very individualized, but ultimately such narrative reliefs were propaganda pieces, and their style changed to serve that purpose better. When the emperor appeared, he was the hero of the story, set front and center, often larger. Other figures were cookie-cutter repetitions. The artists of these reliefs also reduced the illusion of depth, crowding all the figures onto the front plane so the story would be easier to read. That's it for the achievements of the early Roman Empire. Next week we will look at what happened to the Roman Empire in the late 2nd to 4th centuries AD. Just a side note, in case you're wondering why I'm doing this particular series at this time, By 1988, I had decided not to pursue a career in academia that would directly use my doctorate in classics, but I still enjoyed thinking about Greek and Roman civilization. This 4-part essay on the fall of Rome is a lightly edited version of part of a course in Greek and Roman art and history that I offered at my home. There are no footnotes, but you should be able to find any information that you're curious about on the net. This seems to fit in right after the sculpture synopsis in which I discussed Roman art. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.